Never be completely transparent about the message. Keep some of it mysterious.
What was that? I don't know.
Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a psychological scientist and former university professor. In this video, I want to talk about how to be a cult leader. This video has its roots in a popular lecture I used to give back in the days when I taught introductory psychology in universities. It's derived and adapted from Anthony Pratkanis and Aronson's book, The Age of Propaganda. And they had a chapter in there, a very clever little chapter called How to Be a Cult Leader. What they tried to do in that was summarize the science of the day, the social psychology of the day, and the study of persuasion and propaganda, and apply that to cults. I'm bringing this up for a couple of reasons, one of which that one of my viewers left a comment referencing cults, so I wanted to take that up. I thank that viewer for the suggestion, but also because we can see more or less cult-like kinds of features in lots of different groups, including groups that are formed around influencers in digital media, which is kind of a new way of thinking about how to be a cult leader, is how to be a digital influencer. I'm not saying they're the same thing. I'm just saying that there are risks of moving in some of these directions if we're not careful. And the digital media age is an interesting application of these same old principles back from the early 2000s. In the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, there was a lot of attention directed at cults and what characterizes cults because of a few tragic cases, including perhaps most famously was the Jonestown Massacre, lots of people committing suicide, mass suicide in South America. There was Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and that unfortunate event. And then there were the Heaven's Gate UFO cults. I'm wearing my UFO tie here. Lots of these examples of groups who you can identify as cults because they're at least identified by outsiders as there seems to be a great sacrifice of the well-being of individual members for some kind of elite leadership, often in the name of the community or some kind of future well-being that is not being realized now. That term cult often just is used as a derogatory term of, religions we don't like. That's not the way that, I don't think that's a responsible use of the term, and that's not the way that I'm using it. It isn't just a religion I don't trust or that I don't like, but it is those social groups that are characterized usually by a high degree of control over the members, including their social relationships and their thought processes, and then have usually this additional feature of, and the well-being of the individuals is not really cared for, but it's sacrificed for the sake of an elite leadership. Cultish kind of behavior, we can see it in political parties and political movements. We can see it in military units. We can see it in sports teams and fandoms, as well as the more traditional religious-looking kinds of cults. But these military units, sports teams, other religious orders can use some of these techniques, these cultish kinds of techniques, without sort of becoming full-blown cults as well. So I'm not trying to say that if you use any of the techniques that I'm going to discuss, it's definitely a cult. But the more of these features that are present, the more likely we're drifting into cult territory. Okay? Pratkanis and Aronson used the chapter title, How to Be a Cult Leader, I think tongue-in-cheek, and likewise, when I gave the lecture, I called it How to Be a Cult Leader, and I've explained to students because I want my lectures to be very practical for your future lives. Of course, that was kidding. I don't want them to go out and become cult leaders, but I want them to be aware of when it is that organizations that maybe they're attracted to start taking on these sort of cult-ish features. All right, so I'm going to list some of these criteria, some of these features, and we'll see how that goes. All right, so number one. One way to be a successful cult leader is to create your own reality, your own social reality, your own mental reality, your own view of the world. It helps if you can sort of physically isolate the members of the cult. Not everybody can pull that off, but that really does a good job. You can help create that unique social reality by isolating people, but you can also train up a certain degree of social and mental isolation using this kind of us-them thinking. We think like this. The rest of the world thinks like that. Insiders who know the truth think this way. Outsiders think that way. And then we can start sort of making a mental barrier between ourselves and the world. Uniforms help create, and peculiar dress helps create that social reality. Our kind of people dress this way. Everybody else can dress how they want, but we dress this way, and we all look alike because we're wearing our uniform. We might have unusual eating practices and food taboos. That's a way to separate and create a separate kind of social reality. Our own way of talking or using language, weird inside speak, jargon, slang, acronyms, whatever kind of language use that helps mark out a strong in-group versus the out-group. And then a really important one in creating that your own reality strategy is to really narrow the sources of truth that are accepted. So we only accept claims that come from this text, for instance, or from this news channel, or from what the leadership of our organization say. And everything else is lies or potentially lies. So we can't trust it. So there's a very narrow source of truth that's accepted. Those kinds of features help create your own reality, your own social, psychological reality. So that's step one, create your own reality. Step two, keep your membership's vision, their motivations fixed on a phantom. That's always a little bit out of reach. What do I mean by a phantom? The phantom here is a future reality that can't really be realized, or it's extremely improbable that it will be realized. But we all have to work really hard to get there. And it's a good future reality. Maybe it's a utopian society. It is salvation of some sort. It is a world without war. It's whatever it is. There's something super good and positive that if we all work together and we make sure that we don't screw up, we can usher in this new age, this new phantom. I call it a phantom because so did the book, but what they're trying to get at is it's something hard to grasp. It's something that you can keep moving the goalposts so that you can't see that you're making progress really toward it. And it's okay because you kind of don't expect to see that you're making progress. But if you keep focused on that thing and keep people sort of, I'm almost there, that's a helpful technique too. So fix their mind on a phantom. It provides a powerful incentive to maintain loyalty and service to the group, because if you stop working toward that goal, then we all lose out and then it's your fault. So, you want to keep people working toward that phantom. Third, never be completely transparent about the message. Keep some of it mysterious.
What was that? I don't know.
So absolutely don't be crystal clear. Vague it up a little bit. How do we get from here to that utopian society in the future? Use broad, vague platitudes. What does it mean to have a good life? Use broad, vague platitudes that are really hard to break down into concrete steps. It needs to stay mysterious so that people are reliant on the leadership to interpret, to keep explaining and keep clarifying. Because if they can clarify and think for themselves, well, they'll start thinking for themselves and they might leap. They might see through whatever you're trying to do here. Fourth, make that leadership, you, if you're the cult leader, the only link to that prize. Like they can't go anywhere else to get the right interpretation. They have to go through you and your inner circle of leadership. So be the only link to that prize phantom that's out there. Fifth, create a mythology about the leadership. A really cool hero backstory is kind of the way to think of this. And a lot of cults do this, right? They will, for instance, piggyback on a well-known religious kind of backstory like, ooh, Jesus had a virgin birth. Okay, well then this cult's leader has a virgin birth. And you're like, well, you're just copying somebody else. Or they got their insight through some miraculous event. Or this person recovered from an amazing illness in a miraculous kind of way and shows all of these signs of being especially blessed by God, and so that they're ready to lead. There are ways to piggyback on familiar themes that we see in more established religious traditions that don't have many of the culty features. We'll extract those and use those as part of the mythology around the leader. Sixth, incrementally increase demands on the participants in your cult. Okay? Make it easy to get in the front door. I mean, you've got to have some cost to get in, and then keep amping things up. Okay? Sometimes called foot in the door technique. Yes, for little things, people will often say yes to little things like, hey, do you mind if, I just come in for a second and get a glass of water. Yeah, I can do that. And before you know it, they've moved in completely. Because it's hard for us to say no to little things. At least a lot of us nice people will say yes to little things that are asked of us. And then we do what's called dissonance reduction. We feel better about the person who has asked us for the small thing to sort of resolve the tension of, why did I say yes? Well, I must like them. And so it gradually moves my attitude in a positive direction. Salespeople use these techniques as well. Politicians use these techniques to incrementally sort of warm you up to things. And then you keep amping up the demands. And so people become more and more committed by that, gradually sort of moving the expectations and letting people emotionally persuade themselves into becoming deeper and deeper into the cult. A seventh step, really helpful if you can get your new converts to make new converts. I mean, it can be old converts too, but it's really helpful if you get new converts to make additional converts. Why? Because it helps them practice the story. They self-persuade as they're trying to persuade others. It doesn't matter so much that they're not persuading the people that they're talking to. So send them to somebody, out on the street to make converts, or door to door to make converts. Even if they fail, they've practiced convincing themselves why they believe. And they might accidentally persuade some other people, at least move people a little bit closer to joining your cult. Okay, that was number 7. Number 8. Make it hard for people in your cult to think clearly. You don't want them thinking clearly, or they might see through some of your techniques and they might see that you don't really have the goods to deliver. So you make it hard for them to think clearly. How? Well, keep them really busy. If they're busy all the time, it's hard to think clearly. Keep them sleep deprived if that's what you need to do. It's easier when you have a confined kind of isolated space, that weird compound out there where you can be blaring a loudspeaker messages round the clock, which some cults have done. But you can also do things like implement certain kinds of religious disciplines that then limit the amount of sleep that people can get, because you have to do it at midnight and at 3 a.m. and then at 6 a.m. And so they have to be constantly waking up to do whatever kinds of practice it is, by praying or meditating or whatever. Keep them sleep deprived. It's hard to think well when you're sleep deprived. Use altered states of consciousness as well. So drugs will work. If they are, certain kinds of mind-altering drugs, psychotropic kinds of drugs, it makes it hard to think clearly when you're stoned. Constant messaging and constant music and things like that makes it hard to think clearly as well. Never let them have time to reflect and talk with each other, to think together without authorized leaders present. That could really mess things up. Okay, so that was 8th. Number 9. Teach self-censorship. You can't always control what they're going to be thinking about. So get them to censor themselves. You can't always be there to say, don't think that. You're deviating from what's approved. Get them to do that for themselves. Convince them that there's this little part of them that's probably wicked and evil that will occasionally get them thinking about things they should not be thinking about. Rebellious, deviant kinds of thoughts. And you've got to work hard to shut that thing down, because it will lead you astray.
Hey, you're not backing down now, are you, big guy?
Where's the other guy?
So you've got to learn to quiet that little voice inside your head. That kind of self-censorship technique is a really helpful one if you're building a successful cult. So that was number 9. Number 10. Manipulate emotions artificially, especially to deaden that higher order thinking, that reflection again, those thought processes. And you can do this, you manipulate those emotions by caffeine, loud, rhythmic, and repetitive music, for instance, smoke machines, unnatural lighting, turning fans on at just the right time, playing power chords at just the right time. There are lots of ways to control certain kinds of social environments so that people get emotional rushes when you want them to get those emotional rushes. And manipulating that then can be a really handy way to keep a good handle on your cult. That's number 10. Number 11. Piggyback on familiar themes that have deep meaning for people or a high degree of intuitiveness. So play off of those familiar religious themes. Don't try to invent a religion whole cloth. Piggyback off of a certain form of Christianity and then mess it up a little bit, or Islam and mess it up a little bit, or Buddhism and then mess it up a little bit, so that it has that kind of feel of something familiar and deep and meaningful and ancient, you're not just making something up. You just have a new take on really good, old, valuable ideas. Also play into lots of familiar, positive themes that maybe are outside of the religious realm, like the importance of love.
Beyond all explanation, the closest thing is love.
Who's against love? So you've got talk a lot about love and maybe have a fresh take on it. Or family. That's a very intuitive theme where social animals who like to live in familial groups use the language of family a lot. Heck, have everybody adopt the same last name. Some cults have done this. Patriotism or nationalism of various sorts. There are lots of ways that you can play off of these familiar, typically things that we would consider good, and then give them a little tweak in there to make your own fresh take on it. Okay, so that was number 11, piggybacking on these familiar themes that have a high degree of sort of positive feeling or familiarity to them. And then 12th, keep increasing in number or wealth, or ideally both. So you got to have a growth curve, because once you start losing your momentum, people start wondering what's going wrong. Because cults take advantage of these basic human psychological and persuasion techniques, we'll see that these persuasion and psychological techniques are used in lots of places: in advertising, in military, in education, in legitimate religious traditions and churches. And it doesn't mean that those are necessarily bad uses of human psychology, and it doesn't necessarily make the group bad or make it a cult. The concern is when it's way too comprehensive and is at its core deceptive and using its members for someone else's gain. That's when we should be really worried about it. So cults can be religious in character, but they could be focused on health and fitness, focused on celebrities, on political parties, on politicians, and so forth. It's often said that many mainstream religions start as cults, but groups that start as cults can also shed their cultish features. But a group that isn't a cult could also drift into cultishness. And that's a topic I will take up in a future episode. For now, thanks for joining me, and good luck being a cult leader. I hope not. See you next time.